And then we are live, and here we are. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julian Zelizer, the Long View, and this is Office Hours. And I wanted to make sure to get this in on this holiday week so I can hear what some of you have on your mind. I hope that everyone is doing well. Good morning. Good morning. And I hope that everyone has nice plans or some kind of plans to spend some time with family, loved ones, and friends. I know this has become a great gathering point, even beyond the family these days. Hi, Don. And so let's have some office hours, and I'll wait for people to sign in. My foreign policy column just dropped this morning, and it's an issue some of you I know have talked about with me here on office hours. A lot of people are interested in potential leadership changes within the Democratic Party on Capitol Hill. A lot of the conversations focused on Senator Schumer, who is the minority leader. Others have also raised concerns or questions about Hakeem Jeffries, the House minority leader, with a conversation about what's best for the Democrats going into the midterms and just moving forward. The article I wrote in Foreign Policy is a very different period, 1975, and it's a real dramatic event that takes place. The Watergate babies are elected in 1974, a group of young legislators who, in part, are responding to the anger over Vietnam and over Watergate, and they join some older reform-oriented Democrats and just Dave, yes, I will, don't worry, some reform-oriented Democrats. And in 1975 in the House, they really shake the House. They are insistent on reform. And their target is not so much the speaker or the leadership, because back in the 1970s, it was the committee leaders who were still the powerhouses on Capitol Hill. And so usually, ordinarily, the kind of senior members of committees became chairs, and the article recounts how the young new members, the freshmen, the Watergate babies, challenged some of the committee chairs and actually deposed them, which is a real shakeup of the leadership, an attack on the older generation, older Southerners in particular, calling for a new approach to Democratic policy, a new set of issues, and much more. So hope you take a look at the column. I'm going to try later this afternoon to do in the classroom for paid subscribers, and I'm going to go deeper into that story, which is really one of my favorite stories. So I hope some of you can join me there. This Friday, even though it is the holiday, Don, tell me a little more what you mean on Chris Murphy and foreign policy while I continue with this. Friday, John and I are still planning to do that, and now I'm not sure what the hour will be. It might be a little different. And I'm going to have two conversations I think a lot of people might enjoy pre-recorded. One is with David Margolick, who has a really fun new book out I think a lot of you will enjoy, on Sid Caesar and his very famous comedy show from the 1950s. It's a brand new biography that's out, and I really enjoyed it. And it's about television in this key era when television's becoming the medium, and about comedy, and also about Jewish American performers breaking through at a time of great discrimination. So, David Margolick, I'll drop that on Friday. And the other interview I will have for Friday, again, it will be pre recorded. I think many of you might like this too. Will also be the editor of a new book Paul McCartney just put out on his band Wings, the post Beatles band, and anyway, so Ted Widmer was the editor of that, a great historian, and he's in conversation with me about the book, about the band, and about really the 1970s in music and the transition out of the 1960s. So, should be two fun interviews, interesting interviews for the Thanksgiving weekend. And maybe some of you can think of a new present, a new book to give as people start to purchase that. So, anyway, that's what's coming up. And tomorrow, of course, I will have my newsletter. I know some of you enjoyed my interview with Linda Gordon last Friday, his great historian of gender, and I'm going to have another one this Friday as well, another on my series that I've been doing called Their Generation, which is about the historians who came out of the 1960s and the 70s and 80s, who really changed what we focused on in history, looked at history from the bottom up, looked at it more critically, and really shaped a lot of what goes on in textbooks and classrooms and broadened our approach to American history. So I'm trying to create a kind of archive of some of these historians, who they were. I had Michael Kazin was the first, and Linda Gordon was the second. And I have a bunch in the works. I'll put one out this Friday, and then down the line I'll have a bunch more. I'm glad some of you are enjoying that and getting to meet some of these others. So as always with office hours, please do send your questions down in the chat so that I can answer. Don, I think, asked out Chris Murphy and foreign policy. I'm not exactly sure what angle, but Murphy is clearly one of the Democrats that we are talking about. Um, and I thank you, Deborah. Hold on. We're moving. Sorry, this is Zelizer taking notes as we speak. Um, I think Murphy's emerging as a very interesting, forceful voice in the Democratic Party. I don't know if he's planning to run for president, but what he is doing, I think, both on foreign and domestic policy and on democracy issues, there's a whole history of senators who really are prominent agenda setters. I mean, there's different roles. There was a political scientist, David Mayhew, whose work is great on this. There's different roles that senators take. One is the legislator, focusing on legislation. The other, senators and reps, are the ones who really district work is most famous. And the other, which I think Murphy is doing, is agenda setting, using these platforms to really get issues out, to shape the Democratic Party. Murphy has been much more critical of some of the orthodox Democratic foreign policies, calling for fresh approaches. This gets back to the leadership issues. Yes, Carol, I think White House is another example of this. They're also on domestic policy, trying to kind of, I think some of the senators trying to bridge some of the progressive and more centrist. I don't think centrist actually captures everyone, including the new governors. But I think that's what Murphy is playing. And he's become a very interesting voice and also very savvy media wise. I've just noticed he has some skill in this attention setting economy. So he joins a long list. Another from the 1930s was Senator Wagner, Robert Wagner, who did push a lot of key legislation, including the Wagner Act of 1935 that created the National Labor Relations Board and really legitimated unions. He fought for anti-lynching legislation, but he was also a voice for a kind of northern liberalism that became key to the Democratic Party in the 1950s and 60s. A figure like this was Paul Douglas from Illinois. I don't know if many of you are familiar with him. Fascinating senator who really used his platform to push the party for a more aggressive stance on civil rights, till ultimately he lost in 1966 as part of a backlash toward an open housing bill that Lyndon Johnson was proposing. And I think Murphy is trying to position himself in that role, and maybe will also become a presidential nominee. Foreign policy is an interesting area, Don. I mean, I think there are a lot of Democrats who are looking for new ideas in foreign policy, definitely questioning relationships or status quo relationships with various different allies and even positions toward adversaries. But I think it's even bolder than that. It's almost what comes after the Cold War? What comes after the post Vietnam era for Democrats? What exactly do they stand for? What is their response to America first? And I think that's where you're seeing Murphy position himself. A couple of you just asked. About I guess there's talk of impeachment or removal, another process of President Trump. I don't really think that's going to happen. You're not going to have much buy-in from Vice President Vance at this point, who would have to go along with the constitutional, a removal process. Vance, I do think. Let me say two things and go backwards. I do think you're seeing fracture and tension in the Republican coalition really for the first time. And I think the Epstein files and everything that's happened is one place in which this is unfolded. But I think it's there. I don't think it's the way people imagine. People imagine the division coming always, really since 2017, first term, between between uh, kind of the establishment, the George W. Bush generation of Republicans and the MAGA Republicans. I think where the fissures are actually unfolding, and this gets to Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, EL, is within the new MAGA coalition. And I think those fragmentations are starting to emerge. I think the Epstein files was one of them. I do think there was genuine frustration with the refusal of President Trump to release the files until forced to do so. My guess is this will continue because I don't think the Department of Justice is actually going to release a lot of this, which won't serve President Trump's hope to bring this story to an end. I think there are fissures in the huge disconnect between the populism that MAGA republicanism has built itself around, the economic populism, and the harsh realities that have come from Trump 2.0 in terms of budget cuts, in terms of the impact of tariffs, in terms of really still a lot of economic policies skewed toward wealthier Americans. I think you're starting to see that. I also think you're starting to see divisions within MAGA that are not about issues. They're just the normal kind of fracture you see within coalitions, power positioning, and also in this very fraught environment. I think at least part of what was going on with Green is an unwillingness to subject yourself to the kind of forceful intimidation, retribution politics that the president is involved. So you're seeing some fractures. I think Mayor-elect Mamdani of New York played to some of this, and kind of. I don't know what happened, but I do think he kept pointing quite effectively to basic core economic issues about working Americans that define what populism actually is, as a point to deflect and dissipate some of the obvious tensions between the president and himself. So we'll see. I mean, I think any talk of impeachment, for example, is just not happening now. If Democrats regain control of Congress, I could imagine that conversation coming very quickly, to be honest. I think there's more than enough that many Democrats feel warrants using that power. I think that will be in tension with just historically the difficulty of moving forward with that. Also, in the recent years, the impossibility of doing that given the opposition of Republicans in Congress toward any sort of impeachment or removal, which is more pertinent in the Senate. But we will see. But that conversation is then, and until then, I don't think there will be any interest among certainly Vice President Vance's inner circle and himself to try removal, which we heard about in the first term as well, and to trigger that process. So I think the the mistake might be to take the fissures, fractures, and obvious weaknesses President Trump is now struggling with and go to that place because I don't think those options are on the table. Much more likely and much more pertinent right now in the short term is the midterm. It's all about the midterms. I mean, I think that is the kind of key event that will happen, and the more Democrats can do to position themselves to win, both the House and the Senate or one chamber, that is where their energy will be right now for the next few months. And I think you're seeing, really for the first time, the perception of a lame duck president setting in with President Trump, which he is. This is what he is because you can't run more than twice as a result of our constitutional amendment saying that very quickly. But what's different is there's just more Republicans settling in a bit on this reality, and the related part is what happens historically is there's a great memo that Lyndon Johnson writes after he takes office, and he basically takes a yellow sheets of paper and writes out a calendar from November of '63 after Kennedy's assassination for his advisors. That's almost a schedule of what every month will look like. For his presidency, and I can't remember the exact wording. You can look up my book, The Fierce Urgency of Now. I talk about it then. His first year is all about pushing past legislation. He sees a window, but it's very quick because he says once 1966 comes around, legislators are focused on themselves and their own political future. And then Johnson wasn't actually a lame duck because he could run again in 1968. But uh, that is how legislative politics works. And I think those same dynamics are starting to kick in a little early, to be honest, in part because of Trump's approval ratings, in part because of the realization they're positioning themselves for what comes next. I didn't see on the detention centers in terms of what can be done. Will there be continued? There can be lawsuits. Someone with standing certainly can bring a lawsuit against the policies that are taking place. Those often fail. I remember there were lawsuits in, I think, 1991 when President George H.W. Bush was sending troops to Iraq for Operation Desert Storm, and there'd been a coalition of legislators who would file suits. That the president was kind of ignoring war powers, and they're very hard to do. And the reality is, I think right now what we've seen is, given the Supreme Court's predilection for widespread delegation of authority to the executive branch, again, I'm not sure, that will be the focus. The more pertinent focus is, given how this is an issue that is very controversial, and it's an issue, both deportation and detention centers, where the public is separating this from a strict immigration policy at the border, where Republicans are going to be vulnerable. It's yet another issue where I believe this will strip away support from independents and even possibly dampen some Republican. Oh, my thing was frozen. Yes, Robert Caro's LBJ bios are fantastic. I urge you to read that. I can't tell you how many people have learned not just about Lyndon Johnson's career, but also about how power works in America at different levels of the institution, which is really the heart of what he writes about. One of my favorites, and in a book I keep coming back to, I was literally looking at it this morning for something I'm writing, is Master of the Senate, which is gets to the heart of the question in the book. It's about how did Johnson turn the Senate Majority Leader into a position of power, because historically it had been a position where it was the opposite of that. You had lots of individual senators with tons of authority on their own. Obviously, the filibuster, a tradition from the 19th century, not a constitutional provision. Reminder, and I'll be writing more about that in foreign policy, had left Senate leaders really beholden to the committee leaders. That's part of the article in foreign policy, and a very decentralized, individualistic um, uh, a chamber, an institution. And at the heart, I think, of that book, Master of the Senate, is how does Johnson turn that into a much more centralized platform for the leader? And it's a kind of magisterial look at the Civil Rights Act of 1957, a less known Civil Rights Act, how Johnson puts that together, but how he uses different tools at his disposal, some of which previous Senate majority leaders knew about, others which they didn't, to craft that bill. And all of the books are great, but that one is, I think, a very special book. It also has a huge section in this biography on the history of the Senate, which is really one of my favorite histories for people to read, of the evolution of the institution. So, anyway, some thoughts on leadership, some thoughts on detention. Please send more questions. I saw one on the the meeting that took place the other day, and I'm happy to talk. Oh, okay, El, great question. Let me take that actually, and then I'll come to the meeting the other day before we close up. Let me also do my little plug uh, before I move forward. Thank you, subscribers. This is really becoming such a great community, which I remember when I started, they said you'd have a group. I feel like I have a class, which is really wonderful to hear from you and to see familiar faces. Thank you, and paid subscribers, thank you so much, because independent journalism depends on paid subscribers, and I hope some of you who are not might consider becoming paid subscribers now. It's really not a lot for a whole year, and it makes all of the stuff I'm doing possible. I'm doing this all on my own, so I'm working really hard to give you first-rate historical education. And it's the gift season, the great gift for college students, high school students, retirees. So maybe that's something else some of you might consider. So thank you for considering a paid subscription. Dick Cheney, that's it's a theme I find fascinating. There's two levels of that. One is that Cheney, who recently passed away, spent much of his career focused on executive power. He was a true believer in executive power as central to a strong democracy. As chief of staff for President Ford, he was a big proponent of going against the post Watergate Congress, which was asserting itself as the co-director or co-chair of the Iran-Contra Minority Report. He helps to put together a report in the middle of the scandal, which defends what Ronald Reagan's team had done, not by saying Reagan didn't do it, but by saying they were able to do whatever they wanted on foreign policy, and Congress really shouldn't be able to stop them. And then as vice president, not only does he increase the vice presidency, as I spoke about with Jonathan Alter, but he's the big proponent in George W. Bush's presidency of vastly expanding executive power in the war on terrorism, in ways that continue today to shape policy. They did under President Obama and under President Trump. So Cheney's very consequential. And I believe there is a line between a lot of what we're seeing today and not only his vice presidency, but his career. He was part of a generation of conservatives that, as I wrote once, learned to love presidential power, has became enamored with it, but also an architect of what that would look like, and helped to create an apparatus where there was very little legislative oversight, public accountability, or guardrails to what a president and what the executive branch could do. His focus was national security, Dick Cheney, but you can see very quickly how that is a term and concept and policy area that could quickly be expanded. So that's how I see that. And finally, I have to go in a second. Very interesting. But let me do two. I see the question on unitary executive. Why does Congress forego its power is a great question. That's like a whole in the classroom session, frankly. But just, three quick answers. One, they want to, because if you give support, this is what a lot of political scientists say, to the president takes the blame. And you can still find ways to credit claim for successful policy initiatives or national security issues. So part of the delegation is to get rid of the responsibility and the problems that come with it. A second is they're not delegating it, and I've written about this, that it's not the right way to think about it. They are endorsing the president. They are giving a particular president the power to do what he wants in this case. They can take it. The power isn't gone. It's about, do they want to use it or not? And not using it is as much of a choice as using it. And I try to talk about this to groups because I think basically what happens is that, Elizabeth, that's a great idea. I've been thinking about that. So more on that in the future. I think Congress kind of loses culpability, the majority. You see that now. They talk about President Trump, they don't talk about the Republican Congress. But without the support of the Republican Congress right now, President Trump couldn't do a single thing that he's doing. That's an exaggeration, but he couldn't do a lot of what he's doing. And certainly there would be much more pushback. So it's also not delegating, it's a congressional choice. And finally, the third is less a political explanation, and take it for what you will. But there's an argument that as American society become more complex, as international policy became more complex, um, it was natural to kind of look at centralized leadership, and that Congress just has more trouble, especially in a polarized age, handling all this. So I think all of those, and I'm happy to talk more. We're too short on time. It's such a great issue, and it's one I care so much about, and have written a lot about and thought about, that maybe I'll devote an in the classroom to that. And finally, just a quickly thought. Yes, I watched that. Um, I watched that press conference, kind of as stunned as everyone else. I think the mayor-elect was very skillful. He showed some of his skills in keeping the issue focused on affordability and New York, and not ignoring some of his basic differences with the president or his own controversial positions. He didn't actually back down, but he stayed focused on his message as he did in the campaign. And I think that was good. I think there was personal charm, which matters historically in these interactions at a private level. And obviously, he's getting President Trump at a very good moment, meaning President Trump is struggling right now. I think he's just a little weaker than he's been for a long time. And the keep your friends close, Don, I think both of them feel that way. I think certainly President Trump, I think people underestimated how much he both admires and worries about Mamdani's political style and his ability to galvanize voters. I think Trump is aware that could be a big problem in the midterms if other Democrats have that success, or if even you have a figure that excites. That politically can be a huge tool for a party, even if candidates are very different and not democratic socialists. I just think the president is attuned to what that means. Anyway, thank you so much for joining today. Tomorrow I'll be back with the newsletter. Friday I'll have those great interviews, Sid Caesar book, Wings book, and John and I will talk, and I'll drop another interview. And have a great, great holiday. Thank you for helping me create this community, which is wonderful. And we have lots of great things ahead. And again, thank you, paid subscribers. And I'll try to do later today for paid subscribers and in the classroom and talk more about my article on the Watergate babies. Take care, everyone. Be safe and enjoy your time with everyone. Bye bye.